we've talked about before how there are gaping chasms of difference in the Tory party, of people on one side and people on the other, and that these divisions have caused huge splits in the Tory party, not only currently, in the past. It's what led up to the 2016 referendum. It's why Cameron called the referendum in the first place, to try and close this gap on being, anti-EU and pro-EU, but in reality that was not the sides on offer. It was those who are vehemently against government regulation and intervention, and those who liked regulation and understand them and want to keep them. And at the moment, we are seeing some signs that the government wants to try and get rid of regulation and, quote, deviate from European rules. And the second we do that, we lock out potentially large swathes of our industry from doing this. Remember, we have a service sector that is run on data. In that new review, they want to get rid of GDPR. The second you get rid of GDPR, you practically lock out 80% of our economy from doing business in the EU. That is not a good thing at all. So, let's get on to this, because, again, very interesting article in the Yorkshire Bylines, because I do tend to agree that when they try and do this, again, bonfire of regulations, which is often been talked about, there is going to be a mighty fight, a very, very mighty fight, and a huge, factional infighting in the Conservative Party. And as we've said before, when the Conservative Party is united, they tend to be strong. When they are divided, they are incredibly weak. So, let's get on with the article. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, as well as one donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, again, buy me coffee. And as well, thank you very much to all those people who do support me and the channel that way. So, on with the article. So, like I say, this comes from the Yorkshire Bylines. The title is, "The Bonfire of EU Regulations Will Never Be Lit." A couple of weeks ago in The Times, columnist Iain Martin revealed the question Brexiteers like him feared most during the 2016 referendum. And that was, what specifically are the EU regulations that you want to drop or diverge from after Brexit? If the EU and its rules are so dreadful, what would you change? He said this brought him out in cold sweats on TV and even in public debate. This was because he didn't know the answer, and despite having at least 5 years to think about it, he still doesn't, but remains strangely confident that, quote, nerdy Brexiteers will eventually be able to explain it in words of how the Brexit dividend will become a reality. As Miss Martin hopes rest mainly on the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform, or Trig, created by Johnson back in February and headed by former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith, or IDS, in the final effort to actually try and uncover these hidden regulations. They have been uniquely and uncountably crippled Britain for years, apparently. To collide with the publication of their report, authors of Ian Duncan Smith, Theresa Vills and George Freeman wrote an op-ed in The Telegraph, saying, with the power to create our own laws, we can take the lead in high industries of the future. They claim to have set out over 120 recommendations and identified specific high-growth opportunities. Reflecting on feedback from consultations with industry, they say the UK can use this regained lawmaking power to, quote, unlock growth and investment in the technology to help level up the country. This prompted the Telegraph's journalists to write the kind of piece that we could all have forecast of them cheering it on. Post-Brexit Britain should light a bonfire of EU red tape to fuel economic growth. However, those at the Telegraph expecting a bonfire of EU regulations will almost certainly be disappointed that it will never, ever be lit. The first thing of note is that there is not much in the way of hard prescriptive list of Brussels red tape identified for the bonfire. There is, however, some modest tinkering and a quite numerous recommendations for more regulation. In financial services, for instance, it calls for the MIFD2 provisions limits to be amended and a more discretionary and judgment-based approach to be calculating central counterparty clearinghouse or CPP margins. I am sure that we can all agree on that, whatever that might actually be. The list of recommendations is said to be aimed at promoting productivity, competition, and innovation through a new framework of proportionate, agile, and less bureaucratic regulation. The reimposition of one in, two out regulatory duty on all government departments suspended after the Grenfell tragedy, although Trig didn't actually mention that, is called for. Precisely which old regulations are to be scrapped to make way for these new, more agile, less bureaucratic ones is not mentioned either. The report also suggests giving Regulatory Reform Committee a remit to scrutinise all regulations and regulatory reform proposals with increased resources, including seconded experts, without mentioning that the committee ceased to exist on May the 20th. This is less surprising than you might actually think, given the sheer number of committees actually involved. And the Trig talks more about impact assessments, establishing of frameworks, annual innovation scorecards, and a new innovation strategy for the UK, and a UK standards strategy to promote the use of British standards internationally. The report says that it seems tautology that history shows that leadership in setting of standards can play an important role in establishing international leadership. The authors appear to believe that the world's only regulatory superpower across the Channel will adopt future British standards is far more likely than the EU will create its own standards, leaving British manufacturers holding the equivalent of Betamax parents and using bolts with withhold threads. Among the specifics in the proposals to amend the 1985 Weights and Measures Act, allowing imperial units without a metric equivalent to be displayed, as if the average shopper is outraged at seeing goods weighed in kilograms or measured in millimetres. They also suggest wanting to amend or scrap the Onerous Port Service Regulation, or the PRS, which, according to the report, cost about 43 affected UK ports between 22.2 million and 8.4 million a year, the Department of Transportation figures. Compared to the near destruction of the shellfish industry, the savings seem very meagre. Note that this was the only EU directive that Steve Barker could actually think in the scrapping of November 2007, when asked by Kelly Clark in the House of Commons Committee, and then questioned it still, presumably sends Iain Martin into a cold sweat. To better understand the government's obsession with regulation and reducing regulation, a good place is to start with the website regulationorg.co.uk. Run by Martin Stanley, a formerly Cabinet Office civil servant and former Chief Executive of the Better Regulation Executive. Mr. Stanley shows that there have been any number of grand schemes to actually cut regulation, most of which have all failed. With the Lord Young Review back in 2009 and the Lowstead Review back in 2011, the Regulatory Policy Committee in 2010 and the Better Regulatory Delivery Office in 2008, the Red Tape Challenge, the Bearcroft Review, the Red Tape Blitz, and then in 2013, the Business Task Force. This latest body was appointed with the aim of identifying parallel reforms to the EU rules and regulations. Next, we have the Regulation Code of April 2014, intended to provide a flexible principles based on framework for regulatory delivery that at best suits the need of businesses and other regulated entities. And of course, despite all that, the reform tank estimated that the coalition government managed to add around £3.50 million of regulation for every £1 that it removed. After 2015, the Tories also again set to work, this time with Sajid Javid introducing the business impact targeting, followed by the cutting of red tape programme and 1 in 3, and of course the 1 in 3 out initiative and the regulatory directive derivative of Greg Clark, It then carried on with the Red Tape Initiative in 2017 and the Regulatory Futures Review. So you can tell there has been a lot of these going on. And as Chancellor under Boris Johnson in 2019, Sajid Javid brought in the Brexit Red Tape Challenge, and after he resigned following his disagreement with Cummings, and therefore reforming regulation initiative then came in. And this year there has been announced by Business Secretary Kersey Quitang that after all, the government did not intend to cut overall regulations on businesses in the current Parliament. And of course, that did not stop the Prime Minister asking business leaders in a conference call back in January for deregulation suggestions that could be presented as a Brexit dividend. And of course, by February, Johnson has now launched the Trig, followed up soon after by Rishi Sunak setting up the Better Regulation Committee in May. And the PM announced that Lord Frost would lead a, quote, Brexit Opportunities Unit to explore the Brexit opportunities, particularly around shredding EU regulations. In the Trig report, all 130 pages of it should be seen in this context. It is merely the latest in a long line of soon-to-have-failed initiatives, and anybody participating in a bonfire of regulations would be well advised to build all their expectations not too high, or even not at all. The irony of it all, by the way, is that after a decade of near ceaseless activity trying to cut red tape, leaving the single market has burdened British industry with the largest ever increase in red tape in history. So, there you have it. I don't expect, like I say, given the given the history of, quote, trying to cut red tape, as was cited there, going all the way back to when the Conservatives first came in, they have done very, very little to actually cut red tape. Now, will they go forward and actually do a lot of these suggestions? We don't know. But given their past initiatives that, again, they failed to do, because, again, there are always enough Conservatives that go, yeah, we're not going to do that. And they, again, don't have a significant pushback, but given the fact that the people who, shall we say, wanted Brexit were all about cutting regulations, maybe this time this might have given them enough power and maybe even enough pushback against those more moderate Conservatives that want regulation. Like I say, we don't know. But this could indeed lead to a potential spark that could cause a Tory civil war and infighting, which could lead to, well, some more significant casualties, because when the Tories fight each other, it gets very brutal very quickly. So with that, thank you very much for watching. As always, please do remember to that like, share and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, we'll see you all next time.